Hey, and welcome to another sim benchmarking video. Today I am testing the big boy. I've got a GeForce, what do they call this thing? Gigabyte RTX 480 OC model with 16 gigabytes. I used the silent BIOS profile on this thing. It still runs faster than the reference model, but I didn't want the Gigabyte's specific OC profile to be evaluated today. It also uses this much disputed 12-pin power connector. I'm using the adapters to 3 8-pins. It was so tough to get this thing in there. I don't even want to touch it again. So I'm just going to leave that attached. This card, oh my God, I hit the mic. This card is thick. It's almost as thick as the box that the 3060 Ti came in, to give you an idea on scale. So if you're trying to fit this in your mid-tower chassis, double check the dimensions. Okay, so there are three unique, kind of unique features to this Gigabyte 4080 Super. The first of which is that you have 3 display ports right here. I think that's really good for us using triple screens, especially for my setup, that I don't have to change my cables. Not super unique to this card, but a good feature to have. And then on the back, this is where that switch is, where you can change the OC BIOS and the silent BIOS. The Gigabyte model also allows you to push up to 400 watts. That's, I think, 80 watts above the reference card. And I think only the Asus Strix model allows you to go for a more power to the card. And if you look at those copper heat pipes, this is also unique to the 4080 Super on the Gigabyte, is that they're allowing, ooh, can I get a closer angle on this? What if I bend that? They're also have an exposed copper plate directly touching the GPU. That's great for cooling. This thing has the best results for thermals that I saw online. And you can also see the exposed copper heat pipes. I think otherwise that's normally nickel plated, which helps if you're in an environment that has a high humidity. But as far as thermal goes, that's a bit of a compromise. So here's the lineup of GPUs we're testing today, starting top left with the GeForce 4080 Super in the flesh, installed in the test rig. It's supposed to retail for $1,000 USD. The partners are releasing models for $1,050 and significantly more than that. And to its right is the 3080 Ti, 12 gigabytes. This is the one I've been using in my previous videos. With the release of the new 4070 series, its used value has decreased. And I think it's important to qualify where it sits amongst the 4070 lineup. Tech Power Up shows traditional 4K gaming, where it has an advantage over the original 4070 12 gigabytes. And the 3080 Ti performs very similar to the 3090. And the 3090 performs very similar to the 4070 Ti. The Ti Super is about 10% faster at traditional 4K gaming, and the original 4070 is almost 20% slower. So that's where the 3080 Ti sits. The two GPUs at the bottom are from my previous video, the 3060 Ti 8 gigabytes and the 670 XT 12 gigabytes. Both can be found for about $250 USD used. And I recommend both of these cards over the newer variants like a 4060 Ti or the Radeon 7600 because I think they're just asking for too much for those cards new. Before we dive into this, I can already hear some of you in the comment section demanding, where is the Radeon 7900 XTX or at least a 7800 XT? Show us Radeon. Well, let me tell you, if you can push this channel to 1,000 subs, I will go out the door and I will get that card and benchmark it for you. Show me your commitment to this channel. I'll show you what I got. Here are the system specifications with an Intel 13700K running max boost clocks with E-cores enabled. I decided to run the graphics cards at stock. And yes, undervolting and overclocking the memory does yield more performance. And I do have to undervolt the 3080 slightly because it will otherwise recklessly pursue thermal throttling, almost like it has a death wish. Unfortunately, I had to mix and match NVIDIA drivers. For some reason, this 4080 Super actually is incompatible with all previous versions of drivers. And then during my testing, NVIDIA came out with a hot fix. And then there's another driver after that. Anyways, I don't think that's relevant to the performance because none of those changes were directed towards Assetto Corsa or any of the other sims. And I didn't notice a performance change either. I decided to simplify the data that I'll be presenting. Instead of going track by track, I've combined the results from each track and just rolled them into an average. Starting off with Automobilista 2, this is the only simulator that I have to capture results real time with my own driving against AI. Top left, you can see the scenarios I tested, and top right, you can see the graphic settings I used. At single 4K, the 4080 Super is able to push over 200 frames per second, which is pretty amazing and a 26% advantage over the 3080. The 6700 XT leads the 3060 Ti, but I think both cards can deliver acceptable 4K performance. This next graph combines VRAM usage and GPU busy times. The lighter gold color represents the percentage of VRAM being used by the card, and the darker gold color represents how long the video card was busy during the creation of all the frames within the benchmarking. 100% or high 90s means the graphics card is going full tilt, being fully utilized by the simulator. At triple 1080p, the 4080 Super produces very impressive results and actually has a 33% lead over the 3080 Ti, and the 6700 XT still looks great as the 3060 Ti begins to struggle. VRAM usage decreases at triple 1080p because it's actually a smaller resolution than single 4K, and GPU busy efficiency decreases because Windows is projecting 3 different desktops to 3 different monitors in this traditional triple screen format. When we jump up to triple 1440p, the 4080 Super looks impressive. Again, a 33% advantage over the 3080 Ti. The 6700 XT can still put out 60 FPS, but the 3060 Ti is again struggling. Here is the GPU busy chart, which also shows that there's plenty of VRAM for all of the cards. For testing triple 4K, I decided to use NVIDIA Surround and only test the 3080 and the 4080 just because, as you can see by these results, it's hard work for them. It's still surprising to see that the 4080's substantial lead has been reduced to just 3%. This is either a CPU bottleneck or inefficiency in assigning the GPU work. Looking at the GPU busy chart, we see both cards at 100% utilization because they're synchronized with the processor. Now switching over to Assetto Corsa, I have 3 scenarios that I'm testing. We have a Catalunya race with only base content, and then 2 low fuel motorsport replays. And these have MX5 around Hockenheim and a Nordschleife race with over 70 cars and a whole bunch of GT cars. At single 4K resolution, even the 3080 Ti is able to push over 200 frames per second and only trails to the 4080 Super by 14%. The 3060 Ti leads the 6700 XT by about 25%, and we're going to see that throughout all the resolutions at Assetto Corsa. The NVIDIA product is just better in this sim. Checking out the GPU busy chart, and the 4080 Super actually isn't at 100% here, which is a bit surprising, and this suggests that maybe a faster CPU would help increase the frame rate. When we change to a triple 1080p situation, we actually see the lead from the 4080 Super diminish to only 7% between it and the 3080 Ti. This is surprising. When we look at the GPU busy time, it's very weird to see that the 4080 Super, some performance on the table, it's at 83% utilization. I had to look at the performance per track to try and trace this down, and I found an anomaly with the Nordschleife. When we look at the GPU busy chart just for the Nordschleife, we see that 64% for the 4080 Super. This means that on average during this benchmark, 36% of the time of each frame, the GPU was idle, or at least not doing meaningful work. When we look at the average FPS for just this Nordschleife demo, we see that the 3080 Ti actually leads the 4080 Super, 198 frames per second to 180. It may be a coincidence, but the 6700 XT also shows its biggest gap to the 3060 Ti, which leads it by 40% specifically in this testing scenario. It's strange to see two completely different cards struggle here, and I'm open to suggestions on what might be happening. I have tested this again and again, but the results are consistent. When we go to triple 1440p, things go back to normal. The 4080 Super pushes out 180 frames per second, and it's 14% faster than the 3080 Ti. The GPU busy chart shows that weird anomaly we had at the Nordschleife at triple 1080p is gone at triple 1440p. VRAM capacity remains a non-issue for all of these cards. When I switch things over to triple 4K using surround, the 4080 Super almost gets 100 frames per second. That is super impressive, and it has a 13% lead over the 3080 Ti. The VRAM and GPU busy chart shows pretty normal results and what we're expecting to see at this resolution. So we had our first anomaly with this 4080 Super. And I'm curious to know, is it CPU related or Intel related? And it does make me want to test the 7800X 3D that I also have, but that's outside the scope of this video and something very specific. So keep your eyes open for a Discord server. I'm planning to launch one where I'm going to share these little investigations where I'm trying to, debug or sort out what's actually going wrong. But let's go on to the next sim. I tested Assetto Corsa Competizione with 3 replays. One is from an online lobby around Spa, another from the Red Bull Ring in the wet with GT2, you see that above, and a Suzuka night race with GT4. At single screen 4K resolution, the 4080 Super almost hits 200 frames per second with a very solid 17% lead over the 3080 Ti. The 3060 Ti will outperform the 6700 XT by about 12 to 13% throughout these ACC benchmarks. When we look at the VRAM usage indicated by the light gold color, we see a much higher capacity being used by this simulator, and the GPU busy suggests that the 4080 Super might be up against a bit of a CPU limitation. At triple 1080p, the 4080 Super still leads the way with 154.9 FPS. However, its lead over the 3080 Ti is decreased. It's now only 13%. Unlike the original Assetto Corsa, in ACC, VRAM usage has increased in Competizione. Maybe that's just the scenarios I've tested, but we see it here. Also note, the 4080 Super is at 86% busy, so its idling time has increased. But when we up the resolution to triple 1440p, the 4080 Super stretches its legs again, almost a 25% lead over the 3080 Ti. But the 3080 Ti was able to achieve over 100 frames per second at this resolution in the demanding first lap benchmarks. I think that's pretty good. We're seeing a higher VRAM utilization, and the demand on the GPU is much higher here, so the Super is back up to the 90s. The surround 4K battle isn't even close. The 4080 Super has 81 frames per second with a minimum of 60s. I mean, that's amazing and a very clear advantage over the 3080 Ti. If you drop some of the quality settings or change the DLSS value, you can probably maintain 100 FPS at surround 4K with a 4080 Super. That's real good. The VRAM chart shows the 12 gigabytes on the 3080 Ti is almost full, but in the scenarios I've tested, it's a non-issue still. So up next is iRacing, and unlike the other simulators, it's a bit more complicated. Each track can be very different from the next, and each discipline, the type of car that's being used, also has a performance impact. So I'm still going to present the averages of averages here, but it doesn't tell the full story. And I'm going to be releasing another video specific to iRacing. Can we see the difference with 3D curbs or 3D foliage? How do some of the unique assets deployed on newer scans and updated circuits change? Can we see that in the numbers? Well, right now we can't because I don't have it included. But let's talk about what I do have. I tested 10 different iRacing scenarios, and on the top left hand, you'll see those kind of scroll by, and I'm showing the Sebring demo above. Starting with single screen 4K, the 4080 Super has an astonishing 251 average frames per second. That's a 16.8% advantage over the 3080 Ti. But notice how the gap with the 1% lows, shown with the darker blue bars, is actually smaller. The 4080 Super only has a 12.5% advantage with those lows. The Radeon 6700 XT has the advantage over the GeForce by almost 10% when it comes to single screen performance. Flipping over to the VRAM and GPU busy chart, and we see that the 4080 Super uses about 39% of its VRAM, and only 82% of the time it is busy with work. When we switch to triple screens 1080p, both the 4080 Super and the 3080 Ti are able to deliver over 200 frames per second. The average difference between the two cards is about 11% FPS. But the average difference in 1% low FPS is only 8.4% different between the two cards. We also see the 3060 Ti obtain about a 5% advantage over the 6700 XT at triple 1080p. By stretching a borderless window across 3 separate desktops and windows, we're seeing the GPU busy time decrease. The 4080 Super is doing meaningful work 73% of the time during frame time creation. A bit of a mouthful, but this is suggesting that there's a CPU limitation here, not just at this lower resolution, but also with triple screens. Jumping the resolution up to triple 1440p, we see a 20% lead for the 4080 Super over the 3080 Ti. And the 6700 XT actually strikes ahead of the 3060 Ti, but there isn't much between the two. The VRAM bar chart reveals very little concern about capacity, but the 4080 Super still is not in the 90s range of GPU busy. This suggests you're better off overclocking your processor before pushing your memory clocks or GPU clock on the 4080 Super. I also tested surround 4K in all 10 scenarios, and these are the results I got. I'm actually kind of surprised. There's a 3% difference between a 4080 Super and a 3080 Ti, pushing the insane resolution of 11,520 by 2160. These results are more similar to Automobilista 2 than what we saw in Assetto Corsa and Assetto Corsa Competizione. When we look at VRAM usage, the 12 gigabytes on the 3080 Ti is a non-issue, but neither card is able to achieve 100% GPU busy. This suggests that there's an inefficiency between iRacing, Windows, the drivers, whatever. The other sims were able to push these cards to 100% with NVIDIA Surround. Maybe it's a DirectX 11 limitation, or maybe it's a flaw in how I'm collecting this data. I'm not sure. Okay. So is the 4080 Super worth it for sim racing? Depends, I guess. We've got a couple stories going on. One is that, does the 3080 Ti represent something in the 4070 range? I think it does. And if you can get a 4070 Super for, say, $610, but a 4080 Super is another $400. That's a 70% increase in price for, generally speaking, a 13% improvement in performance with sim racing. That doesn't sound worth it, does it? The other part to this conversation is how much the CPU plays into this. I would not pair a 4080 Super with a slower processor. If you haven't, pardon me, if you haven't upgraded in the last year your processor, it's probably too slow. You're leaving performance on the table. So that would be something I'd be conscious of. I would like to do a CPU scaling test to see how this thing stacks up across multiple processors to prove that point. Maybe that'll be another video, but I really want to see how well this thing does in VR benchmarking. I have a few ideas for iRacing specifically, and I want to pair it up against that 3080 Ti again, which I think will represents the 4070. So stay tuned, like, subscribe. I have more stuff coming. And if you want to see a comparison with this, or just to see how a 7900 XTX does or a 7800 XT, please subscribe. If I hit that 1,000 subs, I'm out the door. You've shown to me that you're committed to this channel. I'll show some more commitment to you. So stay tuned.